firstly, thank you all for attending this evening. I know it's going to be quite an interesting topic. Will a free market breakthrough happen in 2021 as it did in Wales in 2019? So firstly, I will do a brief introduction for all of you. And once I've done that, I'll give you all 5 minutes each to have a little chat and basically put your point across about whether you think the same could happen in 2021 and maybe discuss a bit about 2019 and the election. Then I think, Jamie, you'll have quite an interesting spiel on that, really, about your election campaign, especially in Bridgend. And then we'll go into a Q&A from the audience. And then I know we've got quite a few questions already lined up and asked, so that'll be quite an interesting one. So firstly, I'll start off with Laura. Laura was elected as the youngest member of the Welsh Assembly in 2003 and served until 2007. She stood in various general and Senedd elections and currently represents Wylsham on Monmouthshire County Council and South East Wales in the Senedd. We also have Henry Hill, who is news editor at Conservative Home and was previously assistant editor. He's previously worked with members of Parliament, helping them with their communications, delivery and strategy, and is a highly regarded unionist voice and writes for news outlets such as CAPEX and The Telegraph. And last but not least, we have Jamie Wallis MP. Jamie grew up in Porthcawl and studied chemistry at the University of Oxford before doing a PhD at the University of South Wales. Prior to becoming an MP in 2019, he was managing director of several private businesses, and now he represents the Bridgend constituency. So, Henry, do you want to kick this off? Free market breakthrough in 2019 in Wales, significant gains for the right and the Conservatives here in Wales. Do you think the same could happen in 2021?
I've obviously got less on the ground feedback than some of the other speakers, but I think the thing that I've noticed covering Welsh elections for Conservative Home over the past few years is that the Conservatives in Wales have a big structural challenge, which is that general elections and devolved elections are fought effectively on very different electorates. If you look at what happens in general elections in Wales, even in elections when the Conservatives don't do particularly well, they are comfortably the second party. There's no real dispute about who the second party in Wales is at Westminster, and that is the Conservatives. Whereas when you look at what happens in devolved elections, they are basically sort of bumping along with Plaid Cymru. They're usually ahead, which is nice, but they're not massively ahead. And the reason for that is that hundreds of thousands of Tory voters don't turn out for the Welsh Parliament. They turn out for Westminster. I'm told that many of them turn out for the local elections, but they don't turn out for the Welsh Parliament. And that has over the past 20 years actually posed a really difficult challenge for Welsh Conservative strategists, because on the one hand, if you want to build an electoral strategy for the Welsh Assembly, now Parliament, based on the electorate you actually have, that means playing to that electorate, if you like. It means, making eyes at Plaid Cymru. It means leading into the kind of Cardiff Bay consensus. But if you want to, in the long term, mobilise that Conservative vote that's obviously there at Westminster and is out there in the country, then that means adopting a very different approach. And I've written previously for Conservative Home about how those two strategies are really incompatible. So with regards to the upcoming Senedd election, will we see a big centre-right breakthrough? I would really like there to be one. I think it would be a great thing for Wales. I think Wales has been appallingly governed by Welsh Labour over the past 2 decades. I mean, it really is. When someone like me wants to reach for a horror story about the mismanagement of local public services under devolution, more even than Nicola Sturgeon's Scotland, I go to Welsh Labour and what Welsh Labour has done to education and what Welsh Labour has done to healthcare. But I think the challenge for the Tories is going to be, can they get their voters out? I mean, if you look at the last election, there's clearly enough of a vote for what I call the unionist right, which in the last election was UKIP plus the Tories. There's clearly enough there to get a decent number of seats. UKIP have obviously fallen to pieces. I expect a couple of their seats will go to abolish, but I think some of those might be up for grabs. But the challenge for the Conservatives is, can you get enough of those voters out? I'm sceptical. And if you do, the next challenge is, what's your pathway to government? Because obviously previously the plan was to form an arrangement with Plaid Cymru. I don't think that's viable now. I don't think that the membership would wear it. I don't think the Tory electorate would be particularly keen on that. But the alternative is that you then need to put together some other combination of seats. And I think that's a very long-term project, which is unfortunate because, as I say, I think we really do need to get the people running Cardiff Bay out as soon as we can. But I think realistically speaking, it will be very difficult for the Conservatives to do that in the short to medium term. And certainly not after the next election. I think the best thing the Conservatives can really hope to achieve at this election, and if the other speakers want to disabuse me of this, please do, because I'd really like it to be different. I think the best thing they can do is try and eat up some of that vote that previously went to UKIP, that is clearly sort of scunnered with the Cardiff Bay consensus and is looking for somewhere to go, entrench themselves comfortably as Wales' second party in the Parliament, as they are at Westminster, and then use that as a platform, if you like, to then launch sort of a more sustained campaign against Mark Drakeford. That's my hunch.
Thank you, Henry. That's really good to hear. Outside perspective like that. Laura, what do you think?
I think there's enormous potential for us to do very well at these Senate elections. And we're coming off the back of the Brexit referendum, obviously, and a fantastic result in the general election here. It's shown that people who voted Labour all their lives will break that seal and vote for other parties and vote for us, which is incredible. And from what I'm hearing on the ground, even in cities like Newport, is that traditional Labour voters are not going to be voting Labour this time. So it's whether we can appeal to them and really capitalise on all the gains that we've made recently, that being Labour now being exposed as to what during this COVID crisis, which is their own doing of telling the people that we're in charge in Wales. And so we are responsible for the failures of the last 20 years, be it in health and education and everything else, and the lack of transport infrastructure and so on and so on. So that people now are more aware than ever before that it is the Welsh Assembly government's fault, and they control most of the things in our lives. So I think that we need to push and push and push in this election, and I think we can capitalise on that in a big way. Also Brexit, I mean, everyone thought we're going to be doomed. We're going to be doomed after we Brexit. But actually, so far, so good. And we're getting incredible amount of trade deals, and it's all looking quite positive. Obviously, there are a few things that will require a bedding in process, but as a rule, I think it's been very successful, and I'm very glad that I personally voted for Brexit. And I think that what Henry just said is interesting, because UKIP have had it in Wales now. There is no reason to vote for them. So we really need to capitalise on that as well, and bring those voters back in to the Conservative Party, which I think would be quite easy to do. We have a lot of things that we're aligned on in ways of thinking. Not everything, obviously, but most things, the fundamental things. And the important things, I think, in the fact that we don't want to be controlled. We don't ever want to be, and businesses and people to be controlled by governments, be that the EU or be that the Labour Welsh government. So there are lots of things and lots of ways to reach out to these voters that voted for Brexit, that voted for us in the general election. But as Henry said as well, is that they have generally turned out for the general elections and for the local elections, but not the Senate elections. But as I said at the beginning of what my contribution is, that people are more aware now than ever that the Senate even exists. So I think that we're going to see a surge in, depending on how safe it's going to be to vote and the whole COVID aspect of it, I think that we might see a big surge in people voting this time. And I think it's going to be a vote against the government rather than anything else. But I do think that as a party, we need to be seen as the party to be taken over in the next following May, after the next election. So we need to remain positive. I think that Labour have done themselves the damage, and we need to push it, but not too much. We need to remain positive and put forward our positive message about how we would do things differently. And I think that will gain us a lot of votes.
Absolutely, Laura. I mean, I've heard on the ground over the last year, really, since COVID's kicked off, people for the first time are actually putting blame at the door of the Welsh government, not the British government, for significant issues. And I've seen that in our chat, Peter Weavers has said something very similar. And I think for the first time, we may actually see voting go above 50% in the Assembly/Senate elections, which would be a fantastic step, because I think a lot of those voters would be anti-establishment voters who would maybe be gunning for the current administration in Cardiff Bay. Jamie, do you think that will happen?
Well, I hope so. I really do. I think we've got I think we do have a once in a generational opportunity over the next 1 or 2 elections to cement that breakthrough that we got in 2019 and to translate it into success at the Senate, something that we have historically found difficult, challenging. And Henry alluded to the, what I call the turnout difference, where, for those of us that are geeky enough to spend their lives looking at statistics all day and looking at those electoral tables on Wikipedia, you can see clearly, turnout 45%, Conservative vote share down, Plaid Cymru's up slightly, Labour's about the same. You go to a general election, voter turnout 60-odd%, and the Conservative vote share is up. You can clearly see that those additional voters are disproportionately Conservative. It's there in the numbers. It's undeniable. But there is a second story as well, and I think it's one that we also need to front up, whichever path we go down. Henry suggested there were 2 potential ways forward. Do we play to the electorate that does turn out, or do we seek to bring out our voters on the day? Or whichever road we go down, we do have to look at this 2-vote system, with the second regional vote. And it is disconcerting to see so many Conservative constituency votes not appear in the regional count. I'll give you an example. Dr. Altaf Hussain lost his seat in South Wales West in 2016. On the constituency vote, we came second in South Wales West. We beat Plaid Cymru. We came second. But on the regional votes, you can see across the region, across the area, not the region, you can see the votes for us went down significantly and the votes for Plaid Cymru went up a bit. Interestingly, at the time, all the activists and the campaigners were talking about us losing votes to UKIP. That didn't happen. We didn't lose those votes to UKIP. UKIP's vote in the area actually went down slightly from constituency to region by about 500. And what that shows is that if we're going to cement this breakthrough, we need a greater level of understanding of what's happening to our votes. Not just acknowledging that they're not turning out, but the ones that do turn out, we need to find that link between their constituency vote and their regional vote. Where is it going? It did not go to UKIP. So where did it go? What happened to it? And we need to understand that if we're going to cement that fight, because that would have meant 1 less Plaid Cymru member and 1 additional Conservative member. And in these finely balanced unionist debates that I think we're going to have over the next 5 years, that could be the difference between Plaid Cymru being able to prop up Labour or not in a significant way. So I do think there'll be a breakthrough as well, just coming at it not from our perspective and looking at it through the prism of what's going to happen to Welsh Labour. All the polls indicate that they will move backwards yet again for the 3rd election in a row. They're going to go backwards, and they're not going to have the majority that they need to form a government on their own. What happens in that scenario? How do they get their budgets through? How do they get their votes through? Who are they turning to? And what does that mean for our movement, our voice, our ideals in Wales? Where is this heading in terms of the whole unionist debate? And does that force the issue on us as a party later on down the line? At the moment, we simply don't know. We've got to wait to see what the actual numbers look like. But one thing is for certain, what Laura said and alluded to, that we can do well in these elections, that is absolutely the case. We can. We will move forwards. I'm confident of that. We will be the official opposition in the very least if we don't form the government. I'm absolutely confident of that. And I think that how we move forward from there is going to depend very much on the post-match analysis of what happened to our votes. How many of them came out? Was it 50%? Was it 55%? Was it 47%? These are big swings, big differences. There's a huge difference between us getting 48 and 55%, for example. That difference is massive. And also what the actual numbers look like. Because just a small change can mean big things in a 60-seat legislature. It's not a big chamber. So, we've got to do is stick to the plan. We've got a plan. It's a good one. We've got to ride hard now at Labour and Plaid Cymru in this election. We've got 85 days to get as many of our guys and girls over the line as we can, and then basically assess the situation then and have an honest discussion, I think, on the centre right in Wales as to where we go from there.
Yeah,
Okay, Jamie, so do you think that part of the issue is that a lot of people see it as a second preference vote on the list rather than they can vote for the same party twice? Because I think Labour and Plaid Cymru maybe use this to their advantage and know that if you're going to vote for one of them on the left, you may vote the second preference for Plaid Cymru if you're going to go Labour on the first. Whereas on the right, who do you go for?
I think it's a case of us not giving the electorate enough credit. When you look at all of the different areas and you look at the impact of, say, Kirsty Williams in Brecon and Radnor, and you look at the impact of Leanne Wood in Wanda, actually, those parties don't hold on to those votes at 100%. A vote for Kirsty Williams doesn't necessarily translate to a vote for the Lib Dems in Mid and West Wales. And I think that we've got to learn that, learn that lesson, basically, that they are two separate ballots, and that the electorate do understand that. And our record on this is surprisingly not great, despite the success we've had in some of these elections. Moving forwards and increasing the numbers, and I know in 2016 it wasn't quite as we didn't gain any. I know we moved slightly backwards, but still, when you look at the data, at the number of constituency votes that translate to Conservative regional votes, we are one of the poorer performing parties. And actually, if we're going to move forward, we need to win the Vale of Glamorgan, we need to win and keep 2 on the central list, we need to keep hold of Monmouth, and we need to pick up Newport West and still pick up 2 on the list. And in South Wales West, if we're going to make a serious challenge, either now or in the next election for Bridgend and Gower, we need to do so knowing that we are going to keep both regional members on the list. Otherwise, we just exchange one member for another, and it doesn't help us. So we've got to, I think, give the electorate credit that the data indicates that a significant number of them are voting differently in those elections, and therefore we need to treat them as 2 separate elections when it comes to our campaigning strategy and our candidate selections and our the way that we organise ourselves. And I think we're doing that this time. I think we've got a strong slate in the regions across Wales, and the campaigning so far has been very good from both sets of candidates, constituency and regional. So I hope to see us hold on to those constituency votes in the region at this election. If we do, great. If we don't, then we're going to have to look at that in detail.
Yeah, some very interesting points there, Jamie. Henry, I've just got a question that came in advance of tonight's event. Polls and surveys show working class voters in traditional Labour strongholds, such as the seats that the Conservatives took in Wales in 2019, are fairly socially conservative, which puts them at odds with Labour's woke current agenda. Is this something the Conservatives can tap into?
I mean, yes, potentially it is. I think I'm always a bit wary of the woke, anti-woke stuff because as a journalist, it's very easy to do. I sometimes worry that this is something that you can overestimate the electoral impact of. I think that if you want to try and use cultural issues, the word woke probably doesn't mean a lot to most ordinary voters. You really do need to break that down and find specific issues that people are, 1, really angry about, and 2, that you can actually pin to the Cardiff Bay, the Cardiff Bay government. If you have some of those, then absolutely use them. I think that actually sometimes the Conservatives have been a little bit reticent about cultural issues. I think, for example, one of the ones that, I'm obviously a sort of diva skeptic columnist, so one of the things that sometimes comes into my inbox is people who are angry because they're worried about, for example, not being allowed to, they're in their area, the local council or whoever it is proposing to get rid of their English medium school, and they're going to force their child to go to a Welsh language school. Now that, it seems to me, if you wanted, as the Conservatives, to be picking cultural fights, that's an example of a cultural fight that actually has a concrete problem that is directly linked to the Welsh government. But historically, I think the Conservatives have shied away from that kind of conflict. On a broader level, maybe I just worry, I would counsel against doing thinking that sort of broad strokes cultural conservatism and left bashing is the kind of thing that's really going to mobilize a lot of voters. I think that if you do want to build an electoral strategy on that, you need to have it linked to specific concrete concerns that actually are the responsibility of the Welsh government.
What do you think, Laura?
Not too sure, actually.
Because I think Henry's made some very good points on the line.
Yeah.
of the union. And I think that might be something that might tap into a lot of Welsh voters that might be, you know, flirting with going to the Conservatives the first time over Labour, because maybe they see them as slightly too sort of pro-independence. So that could be another angle. Yeah,
I mean, we definitely, I mean, if you see, the Plaid Cymru are really, really going for it in terms of putting themselves as putting forward Welsh independence now, which is doing us the world of good. I mean, we don't have to campaign against them, in my opinion, now, because they're doing us a lot of favours by pushing that so much, because it's just so unrealistic. And but you know, and I don't think most of us agree on here that it's ridiculous, it's just stupid. The idea we just can't support ourselves in Wales like that, however much you want devolution and whatever you feel about devolution. The idea of independence is just not realistic in my opinion. So you know, let them carry on down that road. In that way, I think we'll gain some of their votes even. As with Labour, yes, they can be too far the other way, and so we could capitalise on it. But as Henry said, we've got to pick our fights and the right ones, because there are a lot of members still that are quite right-wing in a lot of ways, actually, and very unionist. So I don't know. That's a difficult one. I think there's a lot more things to concentrate on, but I don't know. I'll have to pass it on that one. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Jamie, what are your thoughts on that? On the union and wokeism? Do you think they're issues that may come to the fray in this election? Because it's been quite an interesting year, 2020, with everything that's happened, and they might be in voters' minds, they might not be. Who knows?
Okay, well, first of all, I think that on the issue of wokeism, I think one thing that we've got to do is foster a mature debate on some of these issues, and remove some of the toxicity, and give people the freedom to say what it is they want to say, and allow them to have the debate without feeling as though they're going to be abused online, or they're going to get attacked. I think it's really important people feel free in Britain to say what's on their mind, and not to be shouted down. Big lessons to learn from Brexit. If you ignore whole groups of people that feel strongly about something and tell them every time they voice a concern that they give them labels, then I think that will do you harm. But Henry's absolutely right. We can't write an electoral strategy just off the base of trying to engage in culture wars. But I think what we can do is use some of these issues as further evidence of how we are the party that is listening to the working class communities. We are the party of the working class and of the Welsh working class, and that's how we cement that breakthrough that we were talking about earlier. Brexit, sovereignty, even to a certain extent austerity, and aspiration. Those national debates have caused people in Wales and across the UK to suddenly think about who they're voting for, because there's a huge divide between the two main parties, and it caused people to sit up and think about, I'm voting one way because my parents did and my grandparents did, but actually, is that the right thing for me? And it's these big national debates, I think, that are going to drive it. And I don't think that wokeism is going to be that big push. But I do think that the person who asked the question is absolutely right, that in Britain there has been too much shouting down, online and offline, too much imposition from the mainstream media and from the metropolitan elite, and actually what we need to do is continue to be the party that speaks sense and logic on these issues, and allows people to express themselves maturely and appropriately, of course, and not fear reprisal, and allow people to be free to say what they want to say. And we just use that as further evidence that we are the party that's listening to the working class communities. We are the party that's standing up for them. And then hopefully, they'll see that as further evidence, but not the main evidence, as Henry has alluded to.
Okay, so going on to being the party of the working class, we've got a question from Jamie Williams. Do you think the Conservative free market message can resonate in areas that haven't previously been successful with the Conservatives? So places like the Valleys, Newport's. Last election, 2019, there were significant gains made with Wrexham, Bridgend and other areas, but there still wasn't that tap into places like the Valleys. What sort of free market message, Conservative message, do you think could turn those areas? Jamie, do you want to go back?
Yeah, okay. Well, I respectfully disagree. 10,000 votes in Ogmore coming second in Llanelli. You know, in a first past the post election, we didn't win seats like that. No, of course not. But we did have record numbers of people in those communities coming out and putting their ex next to a Conservative candidate for the first time. And you know, it's huge mountains to climb, of course. And so we didn't do anything spectacular like, you know, win Rhondda or Cynnon Valley or Ogmore or anything like that. Of course not. But we did get lots of them out to vote for us. And I think, you know, they came out to vote for Boris, and they came out to vote for our message, and they came out to vote for us. And I think that shouldn't be ignored, especially in the context of an election that does have an element of proportional representation to it. We shouldn't ignore that. We should appreciate that and continue down the path that we're on in that, guys. So yeah, I do think we made breakthrough with those communities, and I do think that we'll continue to do so as long as we continue to be the party that is listening to them, and we don't stop listening because we're not liking what we're hearing. We have to be honest with ourselves about what it is that the people of Wales want from us, and we have to go and deliver on that.
Absolutely. Okay, Henry.
So I think really there's two slightly distinct questions, which is what can the Conservatives do and what can free market politics do? Because those, as somebody is saying in the questions, those two aren't exactly the same thing. I think what we've discussed already this evening is the fact that there are different strands of conservatism, and in fact, the current government is really leading into a less free market iteration of conservatism than perhaps some of us are used to and that we inherited from the 1980s. So the Conservatives can certainly do very well on culture, on the union, and all kinds of things. I think the question about whether or not a free market message can break through is, again, you need to demonstrate to these voters why free market politics will improve their lives, because a lot of them, you know, bluntly, have an understandable aversion to the memory of the 1980s, because, you know, I think Margaret Thatcher's government did many great things, and I don't think you'll find many Conservatives who disagree, but there's really no denying the fact that when she was dismantling a lot of that sort of state infrastructure that was built up after war with the nationalized industries and a lot of the kind of regional industries like mining, she dismantled them without paying too much attention to what was going to replace them. And the result was that a lot of these communities did end up suffering. And if you want to demonstrate, and, you know, if you want to sell these people understandably are going to vote for what's best for themselves, their families, and their communities. They're not going to be doctrinaire free marketeers. So I think the challenge for free marketeers is to be able to go, right, here's how the Labour, you know, socialist alternative from Cardiff Bay has been letting you down, and here is how a free market alternative will improve it. And I think the best case to start that, frankly, is education. Look at what the Conservatives have done in England since they took power in 2010. Look at what they've done with regards to school choice, league tables, free schools, letting parents set up schools, encouraging that dynamism, and see what that's done to school outcomes, and say, that's how we can apply it in Wales, and do things like that. That's how you do it. You don't just bank on Labour being unpopular. You have to show in a concrete way that free market politics will make people's lives better on the ground.
Laura.
Yeah, less control on people's lives, more freedoms, as Henry was saying, and also how we speak to people with lower incomes is jobs. They want jobs. There's such a lack of skilled jobs in their areas. There's a lack of businesses investing in Wales. I mean, the M4 corridor, the gateway to Wales down here in Newport, should be lined with businesses. But is it? No, because there's a massive blockage as you're coming into Wales. So we're not attracting that investment. And that's what we need to get across to them, that we need to open up Wales for business in the north and in the south, and just make sure that we capitalise on what we have here. We have incredible access in this part of, in South East Wales, to so many parts of the UK via the M4, etc. And we're not using it. I mean, we need a proper city plan. For example, you mentioned Newport, so I'm thinking of Newport. We need a proper city plan in place that's future-proof, that sort of gets the housing that people need, get the schools that people need, get the playing areas that people need, and all that sort of thing will attract and will speak to the mums, the dads, and everyone at home, anyone at home with kids. But also, we need to provide them with jobs nearby. They don't want to be travelling long distances anymore. We need to be talking about being able to work from home, although Henry and I were talking about, you know, we want to get back to work and out and about in life. We know lots of people do want to work from home from now. And also we need to be thinking about the 16-year-olds that are going to start voting for us now. They want to hear how we're going to improve their futures, how we're going to provide jobs. And I mean, that's from all brackets, from working class right up. They want to know what's going on. But we also need to incorporate in those plans environmental issues and things that they're caring about, and tap into those key issues that are important to them and important to us, and should be important to us, particularly as we're setting up things for their futures and their children's future. We have a massive responsibility to start talking about those issues and incorporating those issues in our manifesto. And it's not just the free market ideas that are fundamental to what we do. It's just how we go about showing them in practice what that means to them, and showing them the big picture and what that sort of lack of control, but forward thinking and future proofing can actually do for them. I think that's what we need to concentrate on.
Interesting. So this is a question coming in just now. Do you believe this upcoming election puts the union on the ballot? I know this is slightly going away from where we're from, and I've seen Andrew R.T. Davies has been tweeting a lot of stuff about a UK-wide framework on COVID and that sort of thing. So are the Conservatives moving in this direction in defence of the union? Are the Conservatives worried in Wales about this? Laura, back to you.
Are Conservatives, are Conservatives worried in Wales about?
Yeah, about the threat the union might be under.
Well, I think we're all worried about the threat the union. When we're unionists at the end of the day, aren't we? We want to keep our union together. I mean, the reason that Andrew's going along those lines and saying that we should have one single message COVID-wise is purely practical and sensible reasons. I mean, after a certain stage, there doesn't need, if we want people to travel with businesses and work and for their family lives across borders they're not hard borders at the end of the day between Wales and England, etc., are there? So we need to start thinking on a UK-wide basis, not have different things going on in Bristol and different things going on in Newport. It doesn't make any sense. So that's why he's going down that line, and not threats to union, just because it makes sense. We are a united kingdom, and so we sometimes need to stop doing things differently for the sake of it, which is Labour's classic way of doing anything. We need to start working together as a united kingdom. So it's pure and simple.
Jamie.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with what Laura said there about the common sense that Andrew RT is displaying in his approach to wanting to manage COVID. It's an alternative that a lot of people in Wales will agree with, and it will resonate with them. And so it's great that he's out there doing that. But to go back to the original point about the union, I'll be honest with you, I am worried that we're sleepwalking towards independence, and I know a lot of constituents in Bridgend are as well, and we're worried about that. Because we're concerned about things, media coverage of Yes Cymru, who appear to be getting in the BBC every other day, despite the fact the last poll had people in Wales were more likely to want to get rid of the Senedd than they were to want to give it more powers. Despite that, Yes Cymru are getting coverage and traction in the press, and that is concerning. And the numerical situation after the election could very well be that Plaid Cymru are in a position to extract some sort of ridiculous referendum. And what that might mean in terms of the nationalist unionist debate after that referendum. I don't think it'll be this election. If it does happen, if the union does end up on the ballot paper, it will be after that, any potential referendum that might arise as a result of that. But I am concerned, and people in Bridgend are concerned about it, and they mention it. It does crop up. I was doing calling today for our excellent candidate, Rachel Nugent-Finn, and it cropped up a couple of times, during the calls with constituents. So it's definitely on the radar, if not on the ballot. And if some things happen as they might over the next few years, then yes, it could very well end up on the ballot.
Okay, so it's on the radar. Henry, this is the sort of thing you talk about a lot in your columns. What do you think?
So is the union on the ballot paper? I mean, in the most immediate sense, no, Welsh politics just isn't there, at least for the moment. I think what's happening more is that there is more debate on the unionist side about what being pro-union means, because since 1999 until basically now, or at least last year, there's sort of been this view that, and this is what's really given cover for the 2 decades of more powersism, is that any thing that involves the technical continued existence of the United Kingdom is what unionism is. And that is increasingly not working for people. I see one of the questioners has asked us whether or not Welsh Conservatives can put to bed this internal debate about devolution and whether or not we should have it and everything. But actually, I think that debate is only just beginning, because for too long it hasn't been happening. And so what's happened with the pandemic is that we've seen, as the other two panelists have said, you know, Welsh Labour's motto has sometimes seemed to be effectively, it may be worse, but at least it's Welsh. You know, with the initial pandemic response, the Volunteers app had to be a separate Welsh version for no especially good reason that took weeks to deliver. Emergency food deliveries for at-risk people early in the pandemic, there had to be a Welsh alternative. It was late. And I think that what's happening now is actually people are asking, as you say, the pandemic has shown a lot of people who tuned the Welsh Parliament out how much power it actually has. And that has started a debate about, should it have all of those powers? How do we actually want the United Kingdom to work? If you're in North Wales, are you happy about the fact that Cardiff Bay is continually insisting on these north-south arrangements that mean that you have to go on a 4-hour round trip to get a COVID test in Cardiff because they won't let you go over the border to get one in England? And that debate's not going away. And I think that is more interesting maybe than the independence question, because as Jamie says, you know, the independence is underpolling abolition at the minute. Independence is not an imminent prospect. But I think if there is going to be a constitutional showdown between Welsh Labour, the Conservatives, and maybe abolish, it's about, right, all of us say we want the UK to continue to exist. What does that actually mean? How much of a role do we want it to play in our daily lives? Do we want it? How long does a Welsh NHS trust have to be in special measures before Westminster has a responsibility to step in and fix that? And those are the questions which I think aren't going away, and they'll be on the ballot paper.
Okay, so I got a question here from John Williams. Wales is a huge issue with our young people leaving and an aging population. Why is no one talking about this? And these are huge issues that face the Welsh economy. What can be done? Laura.
Oh, well, we are talking about this. Well, certainly in my council, county councillors and county council were massively talking about all the time, actually, about the ageing population. I think it's such a massive issue and will have a massive impact on our social services. So, yeah, it is something we're talking about, and we're talking about it at the Senate level as well, as a party, but also in committee. So it's not something that we're brushing over. It actually has to form part of all our policies going forward because of the impact it has and the money that will need to go towards it. Also on the brain drain of young people going over into England, something I've always been concerned about, and it is something that, especially with 16-year-olds voting now, that we need to address. And I'm hoping that that's something along those lines will be in our manifesto. Because it is important that we retain young people in our country. But to do that, we need to be providing the right number of apprenticeships, and we need to be doing these ones you can do at university. You can do apprenticeships alongside alongside your degrees now, can't you? So that sort of thing, and we need to ensure that we can you can basically do a degree alongside working. I think that seems to be the new thing now, and I think that's a really positive step, and a lot of people will stay if they can do work near home and be educated near home. But we need to make sure that we've got the jobs here for people. As I said before in my previous contribution, there are a lack of skilled jobs. There are a lack of jobs, full stop. I mean, we need to be attracting businesses in and providing jobs in places like Newport, where they're crying out for jobs. We need to ensure that our rural areas aren't overlooked, which they often are, and all the money goes to the sort of Labour-controlled cities and towns. So money needs to be evenly distributed to ensure that people, villages and towns don't die out in a lot of cases. I know I live in Usk, and there are a lot of children, babies and children, and young people here, children here, and then there are a lot of the elderly population, but hardly any of the middle. So, and you ask why that is. So, where are the jobs? I have to travel quite a distance to go and get a decent job. We need to address this. The fact that Labour have failed to deliver this over the last 20 years, and we've seen that constant drain over to England, it tells a lot, really, and it's something that we need to really focus in on. But rest assured, whoever asked that question, it is the ageing population, and that is constantly on our minds.
That's great to hear that will be looked at in the upcoming manifesto. So jobs, jobs, jobs. Jamie, you've worked in the private sector, run various businesses. What do you think?
I think I agree with Laura about jobs. It is about jobs, but it's about a future as well. I think what young people are looking at is they want a future, and actually being part of the United Kingdom is great because, you know, there are opportunities that our youngsters can tap into all over the UK. The question I ask is that why aren't there any English youngsters coming here? Because you know, if we're losing our youngsters to London, to Scotland, to Birmingham, Manchester, etc., why aren't there corresponding numbers or equal numbers of youngsters from England, Scotland, Northern Ireland coming to Wales? That's a question that I think deserves an answer, and it's one where you'll have to look at the entire system in Wales, education system that is. I think you will have to look at the overall offering that Wales makes to people. And I think, I'll just relay to you what someone from the Royal College of Midwifery said to me. They struggle with Wales because people are worried about jobs for their spouses, and they're worried about their children's education. So, they are concerned about that. And we're going to have to front up to that at some point. We're going to have that debate in Wales sensibly and maturely, without accusations of being anti-Welsh or not a real Welsh person. If you want to pursue a particular policy, just sensibly and maturely, just have a debate about what's best for our future and the future of our young people.
Interesting. Henry, there's lots of places here for young people. Do you fancy moving in from London to Wales?
Not especially, but that's mainly because I personally, I'm just a Londoner to the depths of my very soul. I love living in a city of 8 million people, and I think a lot of people are like that. And I think that I'd sort of push back slightly against some of the concerns about young people moving. We often hear people complaining about young people from not just Wales but all sorts of different parts of the UK moving to London, and to an extent. And to an extent that's legitimate, because it can cause problems. But I think that we should celebrate the fact that as part of the United Kingdom, young people from all over the country have an opportunity to move to one of the world's global cities to work for some of the world's most, most cutting edge industries and biggest companies. And the question is, as part of the United Kingdom as well, we can provide the support for Wales if Wales does end up with a dependency ratio that is a bit out of alignment and an older population. I think sometimes I read Welsh nationalist blogs, and there's some very ugly stuff in there, and they're sort of taking quite autarkic line about the need to replenish the Welsh stock so that they can be independent, and they don't want to turn into a sort of granny colony and all this kind of really ugly stuff. And I think the advantage of being part of the United Kingdom is that ultimately, if Welsh public services need more money, it will be provided. The United Kingdom is there for Wales. I think that basically, as Jamie touched on, it really isn't a question of retaining young people particularly. It's just about rejuvenating the Welsh economy and providing good public services. I have been writing about Welsh education since 2013, and it's understandable that somebody who is worried about, has a family to raise would take that into account when it came to moving there. And the final thing I'd actually say on this point is that I think that the British government should be doing more, in fact, to encourage young people to move around the United Kingdom, both young people from Wales to go and study, for example, in Scotland and England, and English people to come and study in Wales. I think part of the problem with having the Welsh government fronting up tuition fees, but only if you study in Wales, is that it discourages that kind of circulation, and it leads people to feel less British and less connected to other parts of the United Kingdom. So I actually want to see the Westminster government doing more to to help Welsh pupils fund studies in other parts of the United Kingdom, but also to help more students from the United Kingdom come and study in Wales. I've got friends who went and studied in Wales. They absolutely loved it. And I think that more people should have the opportunity to go and do that.
Yeah, I agree with that. We need to attract more people to Wales. I agree with that.
Okay, so I think when Jamie earlier mentioned Yes Cymru, it's got some people talking now. I've had an email in. Is it time to form a union group to oppose Yes Cymru? I know this is slightly off topic, but obviously, well, people are thinking about this sort of thing. Just popping over to you, Jamie.
Right now we are 85 days away from an incredibly important electoral battle. Yeah. Right, where we are, the equivalent of on our steeds with our swords drawn, charging towards the other side. And now's not the time to stop and have a think about the next field, the next battle. It's time to see this through and get this done. We've got some great candidates like Laura that we need to get back, and we've also got terrific candidates across our constituency regional ballots. Let's do them the good service of just focusing on winning on May the 6th first, and then on May the 7th, give me a call.
Henry.
I think the question you have to answer with a sort of unionist alternative to Yes Cymru is what's it for? What's it going to do? There's not currently a referendum, and you don't need any movement encouraging Welsh Conservative MSs to talk about how much they love the union. So I think if you're actually going to see a sort of organised unionist group outside the party system, it's going to be focused more on the internal debate within unionism. I think there might be a Diva Skeptic one, but if Abolish lose their seats, they may end up turning into one. I don't think there's going to be an imminent referendum in Wales, and so therefore I just worry that a unionist alternative to Yes Cymru would need to have a very clear mission statement to make sure that it didn't just end up sort of sucking up energy that could be more usefully spent electing pro-union MSs to the Welsh Parliament.
Okay, Laura.
Something went off in my house at that point. You asked the question. Did you ask is there going to be a unionist?
Is there a need for a sort of counter to Yes Cymru, a sort of unionist version? Was the question. I mean, Jamie obviously said that he doesn't think right now would be a time for that, with the Senate election around the corner. What are your thoughts?
No, I don't think there's any need for it. I think those votes should come to us. I mean, if they don't, we're going to get completely the opposite, aren't we? So we need to all stick together. Any sort of unionist needs to come to us and vote for us. Otherwise, we're going to let Labour back in for another 5 years. I mean, what a thought. So no, it's not time to set up another party. However you feel, if you're a unionist, you need to vote Conservative. That is the only way that we're going to get the Labour Party out. And or by Cymru, heaven forbid, and any thought of independence. So yes, stick with us. We need to put across a strong pro-Welsh agenda, manifesto, which we're all proud to be Welsh. We want to make things Welsh-centric, but we also need to put across a strong message about our shared British identity, and we should be proud of that. We are a Conservative and Unionist party at the end of the day. I'm certainly proud of it, and so we should put that message across. We shouldn't be scared to.
Should that be on the ballot? Should it say Welsh Conservative and Unionist Party?
Well, I'm all for it. I'm not shy to be a unionist at all in the slightest. I'll always be proud of it. Doesn't mean I'm anti-devolution or anything like that. It just means I'm proud to be Welsh, but I'm also very proud to be a member of British, and I want us to be a strong part of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has an awful lot to offer us in Wales, and vice versa. And we need to just make sure that we capitalise on those things and get that message across, that we don't want to leave the United Kingdom, because it would be daft to do so.
Absolutely. So one last question that's coming from Denise Davis. What can we learn from the 2019 campaign that hasn't been done before in Senate campaigns and elections? Henry.
Well, I mean, I'm not, again, I think I'm probably the person least well equipped to answer this particular question, because I am not the one with the on-the-ground experience in, campaigning on the front end in Welsh politics. I think that you'd have to look at the turnout gap and see what was it about the 2019 Conservative effort, because the Conservatives have, done well at Westminster before in Wales. What was it about the 2019 effort? What was it about the message that really resonated with people? Now, I think that the bad answer for the Conservatives would be if it was purely about Brexit. Because, of course, the problem is if people have lent you their vote to get Brexit done, and you have then got Brexit done, then you need to find new reasons to get them voting for you. But if it turns out that those people voted for Brexit, and that was actually, as it often is, as UKIP found, it was actually sort of, the word Brexit actually encompassed a kind of basket of concerns about other issues that you can still tap into, then I think that's very important. But you know, I think for certain, sometimes there's a tendency amongst devolved politicians to always want to position themselves against even not just Westminster in general, but even the Westminster version of their own party. You know, you see this in Labour an awful lot, where they make a great show. They get very embarrassed about suggestions that they're a branch office, and they always want to put lots of clear red water between themselves and Labour HQ. But I think in this case, if the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's agenda has helped to deliver a not record, but you know, a very strong number of Welsh MPs, then the Welsh Conservative leadership in Cardiff Bay should be looking at that and making an asset of that connection and that partnership, rather than, you know, defining against it as others might be tempted to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Jamie, you took Bridgend in 2019. What can you teach CCHQ?
Well, I think first of all, we had a terrific candidate in that election, so you know, we did well for that reason as well. No, seriously, I think one of the things that I've learned from all the elections, I've been all over Wales, by-elections, Newport, Brecon. I've been in North Wales campaigning. I've been all over Wales. When I was deputy chair for the party in Wales, I was all over the country campaigning in all sorts of elections. And I think the thing that I've always found is that the voters have got to know what it is, you know, what it is that you're trying to say. And I know that sounds obvious, but there has to be a clear benefit for voting for you. There's got to be a reason for them to stick their X in your box. And the Get Brexit Done message didn't just resonate, but it was one that that meant something to people. Primarily that we could all stop talking about it because they were sick and tired of it, but it meant something. Whereas if you contrast that with 2017, Strong and Stable, people weren't easily able to, I felt on the doorstep, they weren't easily able to grasp why that was important to them as you know, them and their families as individuals. So for me, it's all about the manifesto, it's all about the message. And I'm excited to see what's going to come out. And there've been all sorts of things, all sorts of terms used, revolution and devolution, and, you know, power up this and that. And I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out. And I think that for me, what I'm hopefully looking forward to is some sort of redressing the balance between North Wales v South Wales. Perhaps I shouldn't say that as a South Wales MP, but I think for us, we've got to be realistic as where we are. And I think our party needs to categorically reject the Cardiff Bay bubble. And I think if we can get that message across on the doorstep, and if our messaging says, look, you know, we want to pop the bubble, so to speak, what that means for you is it means more investment, it means more local government funding, it means more being spent and more focus and attention from the devolved administration to your area and your family. I think if we can get that message somehow summarised in one slogan, or we can pump that out there, I think we can do really well.
Okay, Laura, you're a veteran campaigner. What are your thoughts?
That makes me sound old. I suppose I am now.
No.
25 years of doing it. Yes, well, we need to, I believe we need to capitalise on that relationship that we have with Boris and the United Kingdom government. As Henry said, I mean, it is in large part a reason why people vote Conservative here in Wales. Even in the Senate elections, the UK government still has a massive influence on how people vote here, regardless of them if they know that now the Welsh government are responsible for, in large part, most of their lives. So we do need to, we need to say that a lot of things that they're doing right, we would copy and work with them, rather than doing things differently for the sake of doing things differently, which is what the Labour government are now renowned for, just doing things differently for the sake of this. And I think that's been really highlighted during the COVID crisis. And people, from what I'm hearing, I run a few COVID groups, COVID health and support groups. From what I'm hearing, they're sick of it. They're sick of that. They want one message. They want to know that the governments are working together. They don't like this petty squabbling which comes from the Senate. So yes, it's. I think that we need to show that we need to capitalise on all those gains that Boris made. And we won. However you voted on Brexit, sorry, what happened? We delivered it, and we need to show people that we deliver on our promises. And I think that is one of the biggest messages that came out of Brexit, is people have almost forgotten the arguments to an extent. What they remember now is that we delivered. We said over and over again, we'll deliver on Brexit, and we did. So they're more likely to trust us now, I think, on anything else that we say. But we need to still be there are so many issues that concern them, and I think we need to start talking about them and not be scared about talking about them, and carry on those conversations. And I think that probably attract them to vote for us again. But we also need to set out, as well as Labour failings, as well as the everything extended from Brexit, we need to make sure that we get the message across that we are a government in waiting, and we need to take control of Wales. It's important, and it will do everyone the power of good if there's a Conservative government in Wales and a Conservative government in the UK. There'll be a marrying of ideas and working that will be beneficial for everyone. I think we need to get those sort of messages across.
Absolutely, Laura. I mean, a lot of people forget that Wales did vote leave in 2016, and with Brexit now having been delivered, if that trust with the electorate has carried through, that could see a lot of people turning up at the Senate level that have previously never turned up at all, which could be very good for the Welsh Conservatives. So thank you all for coming this evening and speaking at tonight's webinar. Really appreciate it, and thank you very much to the attendees who've been throwing in comments in the chat and sending in questions. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers. All the best.